The Tuskegee Airmen did more than fly combat missions. They rewrote the very meaning of freedom in the skies. Their record unmatched protection for American bombers, victories against the most advanced enemy aircraft, and resilience in the face of racism was more than military achievement. It was a declaration of equality, written in contrails across Europe. They fought 3 battles at once. Against the Luftwaffe, they fought with discipline and precision. Against Nazi ideology, they shattered the myth of racial superiority, and against American prejudice, they stood as living proof that courage knows no color. When World War II finally ended, their victory was not confined to the battlefield. It lived in every life saved, every bomber brought home, and every barrier broken. Roscoe Brown, who once downed a German jet over Berlin, said it best. "We did not just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred. And we won all 3 battles." His words echo beyond the war. They are a reminder that true strength lies not in division, but in unity. The story of the Red Tails is not a relic of the past. It is a guidepost for the present. In an age still scarred by conflict and inequality, their example calls us to higher ground. They proved that justice can soar, even when the world insists it cannot. So when we remember World War II, let us not only recall the great generals or the massive battles. Let us also remember the crimson tails slicing through the sky, the men who carried a nation's hope on fragile wings, and the truth they proved for all time. Their fight was not just to win a war. It was to shape a world where freedom, dignity, and peace would endure. The Tuskegee Airmen did not simply make history. They changed history. And their legacy, born in the darkest days of World War II, still flies with us today. The journey of the Tuskegee Airmen did not begin in the skies over Europe. It began decades earlier, in the soil of American prejudice and the rigid structures of segregation. Long before Charles Hall pulled the trigger that downed a German fighter, the United States military had already decided what black men could and could not do. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College issued a report titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. Its conclusion was damning. Compared to white soldiers, the report claimed, black soldiers were of inferior mentality and inherently weak in character. It stated plainly that they lacked the intelligence for technical duties and the courage for combat leadership. These were not the mutterings of individual racists. This was official military policy, binding, restrictive, and meant to last. Yet even as the military tried to lock black Americans out of the skies, pioneers were already breaking barriers elsewhere. Eugene Bullard, denied the chance to fly for his own country during World War I, crossed the Atlantic and flew combat missions for France. Bessie Coleman, turned away by every flight school in America, traveled to France in 1921 and earned her pilot's license, becoming the first African-American woman to do so. In Chicago, the Coffey School of Aeronautics trained dozens of black civilian pilots during the 1930s, demonstrating beyond any doubt that the art of flying was not bound to color. As the clouds of another global war gathered in the late 1930s, calls for justice grew louder. Civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, labor organizer A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie demanded change. Black newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, pressed the government relentlessly. Their question cut deep. How could America prepare to fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? Politics soon intersected with principle. Franklin D. Roosevelt, seeking an unprecedented third term in 1940, needed black votes in northern cities. Pressure mounted. On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 was signed. Senator Harry H. Schwartz had inserted an amendment forcing the Civil Aeronautics Authority to include at least one school to train black pilots. It was a small crack in a very thick wall, but it was a start. 2 years later, on January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black flying unit in American history. The announcement, however, came with a caveat. This would be an experiment. The military's expectation was not success but failure, confirmation of the very prejudices it had cultivated for decades. Into this fraught moment stepped Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., son of the first black general in the United States Army. Davis knew more about isolation than most men ever would. At West Point, he endured 4 years of near-total silence. His white classmates refused to speak to him except for official duties. He studied alone, dined alone, marched alone. Yet out of that silence came a steel-hard determination. When he was chosen to command the new squadron, he understood the weight of the task. The hopes of 13 million black Americans rested on his shoulders. Training began at Tuskegee, Alabama, in 1941. It was no ordinary training. The program demanded 300 hours of flight time, compared to 200 for white cadets. The washout rate was brutal, 60%, compared to 40% at white schools. Colonel Noel Parrish, a white officer who commanded the base, later described the men who graduated as a super-selected group. Only the best of the best survived Tuskegee. But training was not confined to the cockpit. Cadets endured hostility from local townspeople who resented their presence. White officers often treated them with suspicion or outright contempt. Many in Washington, including senior generals, quietly expected and even hoped that they would fail. Every error, every accident, every crash could have been used as evidence that the experiment was doomed. The men understood this. Their margin for error was zero, and so, with discipline as their armor and endurance as their fuel, they persevered. Mechanics, armorers, and ground crews, all black, worked tirelessly alongside the pilots. They formed not only a squadron but a brotherhood, a family bound by shared struggle and the knowledge that they were rewriting the story of American freedom with every hour they logged in the air. By 1943, the first class of Tuskegee pilots had earned their wings. 26 men, led by Captain Davis, sailed for North Africa. Their assignment was to join the 33rd Fighter Group in Tunisia. But even in the theater of war, prejudice followed. Colonel William W. Momeyer, commander of the group, made no secret of his disdain. He kept the Tuskegee pilots away from the fiercest action, assigning them to minor patrols. He believed they would fail, and he was eager to prove it. But the men of the 99th did not falter. On June 2, 1943, they flew their first combat mission against the island of Pantelleria. German fighters struck, but the Tuskegee pilots held formation, protecting their bombers. No planes were lost. It was a small victory, but a critical one. The Luftwaffe had just learned its first lesson. These men would not break under fire. And yet, the doubters remained. Many officers in the U.S. Army Air Forces dismissed the results as luck. Critics still spoke of the experiment in past tense, as though its failure was inevitable. But history was about to change. In just a few weeks, Charles Hall would fire his guns over Sicily, and the Tuskegee Airmen would step out of the shadows of doubt and into the bright, unflinching light of combat. The summer of 1943 marked the true baptism of the Tuskegee Airmen. By now, the 99th Fighter Squadron had crossed from training fields into the crucible of combat. Their aircraft, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, was a rugged but outdated machine. Against the sleek German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and the deadly Focke-Wulf 190s, the Warhawk was inferior in speed and climb. What it had was toughness and maneuverability, and what its pilots had was discipline, determination, and a cause greater than themselves. The defining moment came on July 2, 1943. Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, flying his 8th mission, spotted 2 German fighters stalking American bombers over Sicily. With cool precision, he maneuvered between the bombers and the enemy. He fired a long burst, and one of the Focke-Wulfs fell in flames. When Hall returned to base, the airfield erupted in celebration. Black ground crews, who had endured insults and skepticism, finally had proof. Their pilots could fight and win. Hall's kill was the first aerial victory by an African-American pilot in United States military history. The symbolism was electric. Hall had not only saved bombers, He had destroyed the myth that black pilots lacked courage. Word spread quickly through both the American ranks and the German intelligence networks. The experiment had drawn first blood. Still, prejudice remained. In January 1944, after 7 months of combat, Colonel Momire filed a scathing report. He accused the 99th of lacking aggressiveness and recommended their removal from combat. His words reached General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, who considered shutting the program down altogether. But fate intervened. On January 27, 1944, at the Allied beachhead of Anzio, the Tuskegee pilots faced overwhelming odds. 15 of their P-40 seconds encountered a swarm of Focke Wulfs. The battle raged for 2 days. Sources vary, but between 8 and 13 German fighters were destroyed. Charles Hall added 2 more to his record. What they accomplished with outdated planes silenced the critics. The War Department launched a comparative study, and the conclusion was clear: the 99th was performing as well as any white squadron. The experiment could not be dismissed because it had succeeded. That spring, the 99th joined with the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons to form the 332nd Fighter Group. Their base was Ramitelli, Italy, a rough airfield near the Adriatic coast. Here, under Colonel Davis, they received new aircraft, the P-51 Mustang, the finest fighter of the war. Sleek, fast, long-ranged, armed with 6 50 caliber machine guns, the Mustang transformed them from underdogs to equals. Davis knew what this meant. Standing before his men, he gave a directive that would define their legend. We cannot afford to lose bombers. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. While other fighter groups sometimes abandoned bombers to chase German planes and pad their victory scores, the Red Tails would never break formation. Their discipline became their identity. In June 1944, to help identify units in combat, fighter groups were ordered to paint distinctive markings on their planes. The 332nd chose red. Not just nose cones, but entire tail sections, painted crimson against the silver fuselage. From that day, they were known simply as the Red Tails. At first, the bomber crews did not know the race of their escorts. They only knew what they saw: fighters that stayed close, fighters that never abandoned them, fighters that wagged their wings in greeting before settling into their protective arcs. Word spread quickly: request the Red Tails if you can get them. Their missions grew longer and more dangerous. Deep into Austria, Hungary, Poland, and Germany itself, the Red Tails flew. They escorted B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators across flak-filled skies. They faced swarms of German fighters, often outnumbered, sometimes outgunned. But they did not break. On July 18, 1944, Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers headed to Munich. Delays left them orbiting in enemy airspace. When the bombers finally arrived, so did nearly 100 German fighters. The battle was fierce and costly. 15 bombers were lost, 3 Tuskegee pilots killed. Critics again claimed the losses proved the Red Tails could not handle large-scale engagements. But operational records showed the truth. The Germans had massed overwhelming numbers, and without the Red Tails, the disaster would have been far greater. As mission followed mission, statistics began to tell a remarkable story. Across 179 bomber escort operations, bombers protected by the Red Tails lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, compared to an average of 46 under other P-51 groups. It was a record unmatched in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. Behind these numbers was a constant reality. The Tuskegee Airmen fought 2 enemies at once: the Luftwaffe above and prejudice below. Even as they racked up victories, they endured skepticism from commanders, segregation in camps, and limited supplies compared to white units. Yet in the cockpit, none of that mattered. What mattered was skill, discipline, and courage, and the Red Tails had all 3. By the end of 1944, their reputation was secure. They were no longer an experiment. They were a fighting force whose discipline saved lives and whose record demanded respect. In the skies of World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen had proven themselves beyond all doubt. By late 1944, the Red Tails had become more than escorts. They were a symbol. Their crimson tails cut across the European skies like banners of defiance. But as the war entered its final, desperate phase, the Luftwaffe prepared to unleash its deadliest weapons. The Battle of July 18, 1944, foreshadowed the scale of the challenge. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. led 66 P-51 Mustangs deep into German airspace to protect bombers bound for Munich. The bombers were delayed, forcing the Red Tails to circle over hostile territory. When the lumbering formations finally appeared, so did the enemy, nearly 100 German fighters attacking in coordinated waves. The sky turned into chaos, bombers flaming, fighters twisting, tracers crisscrossing the heavens. In 20 minutes of brutal combat, 15 American bombers were destroyed, along with 3 Red Tail pilots, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics pounced on the losses, claiming black pilots could not handle large-scale engagements. But deeper analysis revealed the truth. The Germans had massed overwhelming numbers. Without the Red Tails, the losses would have been catastrophic. Instead, the bombers reached their target, and many returned home. Even as the Allies gained dominance, Germany had one last card to play: the jet fighter. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was unlike anything the world had seen. Powered by twin turbojet engines, it could reach speeds over 540 miles per hour. Against these machines, propeller-driven fighters stood little chance. The appearance of the Me-262 sent a shudder through Allied bomber crews. Could even the Red Tails stop them? On March 24, 1945, the answer came. That morning, the Red Tails were tasked with escorting bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin, the longest and most dangerous mission they had yet faced. Intelligence warned that Me-262 seconds from Jagdgeschwader 7 would defend the target. Colonel Davis led 43 Mustangs into the heart of the Reich. The German jets appeared, streaking in at impossible speeds, but the Tuskegee pilots had studied their enemy carefully. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown explained, "We knew the jets were faster. So instead of chasing them, we anticipated their passes and turned into their blind spots." Brown's strategy worked. He closed on a jet, fired, and saw the pilot bail out. Lieutenant Earl Lane achieved the near impossible, hitting an Me-262 with a long-range deflection shot. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed a third. In one afternoon, the Red Tails destroyed more German jets than most fighter groups managed in the entire war. The mission earned them a Distinguished Unit citation, yet not every encounter ended in triumph. 32 Tuskegee pilots were captured during the war, their experiences in German prison camps adding another layer of complexity to their story. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, shot down over France, was stunned by the depth of German intelligence about his unit. His interrogators knew details about his commanders, his base, even his parents' home in Detroit. Inside Stalag Luft 3, Jefferson experienced a bitter irony. White American prisoners, many of whom had ignored or insulted black men at home, now treated him as a brother in arms. In a Nazi prison camp, he found a measure of equality that his own country still denied him. Meanwhile, among bomber crews, the legend of the Red Tails was cemented. They were no longer faceless escorts. They were saviors. Crews told stories of how the crimson-tailed fighters stayed close when others peeled away, how they wagged their wings in greeting, how they shielded damaged bombers at great risk to themselves. They called them the Red Tail Angels. The statistics confirmed the legend. Over 179 escort missions, bombers under Red Tail protection lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, far fewer than with any other group. 112 enemy planes destroyed in aerial combat. More than 950 locomotives, trucks, and vehicles destroyed on the ground. But beyond numbers, the Tuskegee Airmen's greatest achievement was symbolic. In the skies of World War II, they had faced not only Germany's finest pilots, but also the poisonous weight of two racial ideologies: Nazi belief in Aryan supremacy and American segregation that doubted their worth. Against both, they triumphed. In those final months of the war, as jets screamed over Berlin and bombers rumbled through flak clouds, the Red Tails proved that courage and discipline know no color. Their crimson banners did not just mark their planes, they marked a turning point in history.